Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the Zombie Train. Here we are looking at this here episode of Under Construction that's coming out at around the same time, sped up to 8 times speed. That's what we do every time, but that's what it is. We're leaving Olive. That's what that episode is about, so check it out, I suppose. We're going to be building some hills in 8 times speed. Anyways, today, this is episode 241. I'm your host, Ellis, otherwise known as Train Man, and this episode is about converting coaches. Once again, the 5th car on the train, the Barracks. And once I've said before that this is a series of questions spawned by a question by Dean back in episode 209, and so I'm covering the cars one at a time. Now, the Barracks, and that was sort of the name we gave it. I'm not sure if that's proper or not in terms of what to call the place, but it's what it was. It was just the sleeping quarters for everything, and it was one of the more complicated cars, but it was one of the easier ones to build, and it was one of the ones that got started really early, because we started off just getting cots, mattresses, whatever, laying them on the floor when we had, not too many people. And then we started building sort of racks, like you'd see sort of on a naval ship or on a submarine. Bunks that were too tall. Cots, basically, is what they were. And some of them we sort of repurposed from other stuff. Some of them we built out of plywood. Some of them we built out of pipe. It was pretty haphazard, but when you looked at it, it didn't look all that bad. But there were, I'm going to say something like 40 bunks in that coach. And that's quite a bit. But that's what it was. The cots were not all that long. If you were particularly tall, you would have a problem stretching out on one, but we sort of had to make a happy medium somewhere, and also the cots we had were not very long either. So, the things that we were building them out of, these actual cots, and then some of them we did build sort of by suspending a piece of fabric from a framework, and that was a little bit sketchy. Sometimes that didn't go so well. There were definitely a couple of instances where somebody got dropped, thankfully none where the person on the top got dropped onto the person on the bottom, because we always made sure to have the ones that were constructed well on top. Constructed the best on top, because you didn't want somebody to fall that far. Not to say they were foolproof, but to say that when they broke, it was always when somebody was not underneath them, because they did not break that often. And also, luck. Underneath the bottom cots, there were storage containers, one for each person. Usually one on the right went to the person on the bottom, one on the left went to the person on the top. But that wasn't always true. These were drawers, not like IKEA drawers, but almost like filing cabinet drawers, which were wider than usual. A couple of them. This was very haphazard, because it was one of the first coaches to really get stuff put into it, because we needed a sleeping space. And that's that. Now, so the cots were mismatched, the drawers were mismatched, and we got most of the way down the coach before we went, okay, well, what else? And that's when we realized, okay, we need to have that's about when we were getting sort of fed up with diving into rivers and stuff. It was, we need to have a bathroom, shower, whatever. We didn't put a bathroom with stalls in there, but down like the end of the coach, we blocked out a little area. We put the hallway all the way over to the side, like you'd expect in a regular bunk coach. And we tiled up an area, and that went surprisingly well, just in terms of holding water. So we tiled up an area, we put some shower heads in, it sort of looked like a gym shower. Hangers outside for towels, a little shelf for towels and stuff, because some people had their own towel, but a lot of times we didn't. What else? Well, there's the big thing, which was we filled in the clerestory with some big water tanks. And that was heavy enough that we had to brace the walls of the coach a little bit more. So what we ended up doing was sort of adding some reinforcement, and we also used the posts that held up the inside sides of the bunks to hold up the ceiling, just for extra strength. Now, that was not really calculated at all. That was just something that we were like, yeah, it seems like this would be a good idea. It seems like we need to put in some extra bracing for the roof here, because it started making some funny noises when we filled the top with water. But we put the water up there. We started running it through the shower. The shower did have a couple of leaks at the beginning. And we ended up, like a few months down the road, we realized that there were some leaks in the floor, and that they were getting into the wood underneath because we didn't pull the wood up. We just put tile down on top of it, and that was a stupid decision, but it's sort of what we figured at the time. There wouldn't be that much of an issue as long as we kept the floor watertight. And we didn't keep the floor watertight, and the boards got inundated with water, and they started to rot, and they started to mold. And so what we had to do was we had to tear the floor of the shower out, cut the boards that were a problem, and once we did that, we basically just built a whole new floor not out of wood. And we built it primarily out of metal beams and then tile on top of that, plate metal and tile on top of that, which lasted a lot longer. And lasted without complaint up until the tile started to crack, which was years down the line. The grout had worn away. But there were like 3 heads in there. It was still kind of cramped. You wouldn't want to jam too many people in there at once. And yeah, it was a communal shower. It wasn't exactly private. But it was better than what we had, which was rivers and the ocean. So there wasn't really any complaining on that front. And from that point, the coach didn't really evolve any farther. It just sort of got spiffed up. We didn't have any lights on the ceiling, because obviously there was all the water up there. We had lights on which were attached to some of the cots, almost like safety lamps. And then we had actually curtains that covered all the cots. So each cot set, each stack, had its own curtain that you could draw back. It was shared between the top and bottom, which was a slight annoyance on the occasion, or on occasion, but not always. So a few people opted to get other curtains that they could hang just on the top and then just on the bottom, and that worked out fine for them. I never bothered to do that, mostly because I was not getting up and down at odd hours of the night. I would get up early and go to bed late, but it's not like the person I was the top bunk and Emilio was the bottom bunk, so it wasn't like we were getting up at different times, because he handled the firing up of the engine a little bit, and I handled most of the other maintenance work that had to be done there. We were repair in the morning, so it was not unusual for us to get up at the same time. In fact, it was unusual for us to get up at different times unless one of us had a long night or something. The passageway down the middle, because the cots were done sideways, the passageway down the middle of the car was actually, it was more spacious than you might expect. Now, let me do this real quick. So, you have 88 coach, 6 cots. Yeah, no, yeah. So, plenty of room in that coach. Plenty of cot space. So, that was really that. There wasn't too much to it. It was complicated in terms of how everything went together, but the coach itself and the construction of it was fairly simple. Like I've said, the showers were the most difficult part when it comes to maintenance, because they had to have their floor replaced and there would be leaky pipes, and there were 2 valves One of them was to, like, the first shower head, and the other one was to the other two. So if you just wanted one, you could just have one. If you just wanted two, you could just have two. If you wanted all three, you could have all three. And the mixing valve, they were not mixing valves, actually. That's the other thing. They were not mixing valves, because we only had whatever temperature water was in the tank on the ceiling. Now, the tank on the ceiling was insulated from the outside fairly well, but that did not mean it got cold. That did not mean it didn't get cold. Later on, when the floor of the shower was down, I was fed up with cold water, and decided that it would... decided that it would be a brilliant idea to run train line steam through a heating unit, almost, just heater tubes, that ran through the thing on the ceiling. And that worked wonderfully, actually, and we put a valve for train line steam up to there inside of the shower, so that when before the shower was turned on, you could go in there, turn on that, get train line steam to start heating the water up if there was steam available, and then when you were done with the shower, you could shut it so we weren't wasting train line steam if nobody was using the shower, sorry. And then, although it was a bit to get that up to a decent temperature, but you did have to play with it a little bit because you're piping hot steam through a tank of water. It's not a scientific thing at all. It is, we're going to pump as much steam through here as we can until it warms up to a decent amount, and then we're going to tone it down a little bit so nobody gets burned. That was our solution to the "it's cold in here" problem. However, another problem came about where when we started going to other places, or when we started leaving the coach alone for a while, which wasn't particularly often, but it did happen from time to time, there was a danger of the ice freezing in the thing up top. So we ended up having a small steam reservoir that was extremely insulated, and emphasis on small, which would then slowly sort of leak steam into the heating pipes to keep it at a temperature that was slightly above freezing for the duration of the night. And that was also not a scientific process, and it worked sometimes and it didn't work sometimes. And at this point we have a lot of piping in the walls and stuff in that coach, especially towards the shower end, and there was a lot that could go wrong in there, and a lot in that tangle of pipe that did typically leak and caused all sorts of trouble for us, really. But the coach itself was, it was never more trouble than it was worth. It was always, always, always worth it to have a hot shower, which, wow. You don't know what you've got until you don't have hot water anymore, and you don't have running water anymore. And being able to get that in even just that one coach was so important that anytime anything went wrong in that, it was, let's put whatever we're doing on hold and fix this, because it was something that literally affected every single person on the train. It also meant that people could not get away with stinking as much anymore. And is that something that you forget? Something that you don't realize is going to happen is the moment you're out there fending for yourself with a bunch of other people in the wilderness, and you don't have like deodorant or anything like that, it gets bad fast. I mean, you get used to it, but we got used to it, and then we got the shower, and then we didn't. Then we sort of realized how bad it was, and so it just gave everyone an incentive to take more showers. Now, we had to fill up that water tank pretty often. We used the same pump that we used to fill up the auxiliary water tanker, which I've talked about before. And eventually, I think I said we had a thing installed on that, so we ended up moving the other pump. There was a hand pump, there was a steam-powered pump, there was a small diesel pump that we never used. I don't remember which pump specifically I was talking about in that episode, but anyways, We're 2 weeks from a run session. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I will see you next week. Train Man out.